Okay, so hi, I'm Kristen Kripp, and I'm president of Idea Student Society ASU, and we're hosting an event tonight, Navigating Grad School, which we're hoping will be an ongoing series, but tonight we're just covering grad school applications. And we have with us, you each want to introduce yourselves and just say like what school you're currently working at? Jackie, why don't you start?
uh, Jackie, and I am going to Southern California University of Health Sciences for genetics, human genetics and genomics.
I can go next. Hi, I'm Nick. I go to Temple University where I'm getting my PhD in cognitive psychology. I almost forgot. haven't had to do an introduction for a while.
It's okay.
Hi, I'm also Nick. I'm going to University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign for electrical engineering.
Okay. Well, the first question that I have for you all tonight is how did you decide grad school was right for you?
Should I start again? Should we just go in that order?
Go for it. Yeah,
Okay.
go for it.
So a big that I'm 30, and I spent my young adult life being a mom, and that type of experience in a lab or anything was not there. So I could spend the next 5 years doing grunt work. Like right now, I work at Thermo Fisher. I'm still here actually, and I'm a scientist one. I could keep doing that and climb the ladder that way, or go to grad school and kind of skip some of those. So that was a big one for me. Um, but I'm also like really passionate about genetics and science in general, really. But my, you get a very general education in a lot of different things for your bachelor's, and I really wanted to learn more specifically about genetics and genomics and see where that takes me in my career.
That's interesting, Jackie. I'm also a parent, actually. I feel like you don't meet many other parents that are also in grad school, so that's pretty unique and cool. I don't know how I guess I had been working in research labs starting my sophomore year of undergrad. I just really took to psychology. When I went to college, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I like went in thinking I was going to do economics, and I took an econ class and I hated it. And then I started like doing all these other, I tried every other major. And eventually I took a psychology class and I just thought it was really cool and interesting. I ended up in a lab shortly after. And yeah, I just kind of kept going from there. After I graduated, the lab that I was working in as an undergrad hired me full time. And I just enjoyed it. It was fun. I enjoyed the research process, which I really got to experience during my undergrad. And I would just like see grad students like, running their own projects and coming up with questions and figuring out ways to answer them. And I just wanted to be like them. So yeah.
Yeah, I've kind of always been interested in grad school as well. I had like a really good internship where it was very much research focused. A lot of the kind of dichotomy with engineering is when you graduate, you can immediately go into the workforce, or you can kind of try to pursue higher education. And generally, when you go into grad school, you work on a lot more theoretical stuff, whereas you're a little bit more concrete. Again, not a hard and fast rule, but that's generally how it tends to go. And so I've always enjoyed the more theoretical type of work. Um, so yeah, that's kind of where I'm there, or why I'm here. But I will say a lot of the time, if you go into industry for electrical engineering, the companies will sometimes pay for you to get a master's or a PhD. So you do also have to kind of take that into account.
So, what experiences or resources prepared you for graduate school, and how did you find them?
So for me, it was a little bit different because I initially was planning on going for genetic counseling. So I'll cover that. There's several different online networks. There's the Minority Genetic Professionals Network, and through them, I was able to find a mentor. And so I had her for about a year and a half, and then she's the one that told me about volunteering with Crisis Text Line, and then I volunteered as a genetic counseling assistant, and I found them on the National Society for Genetic Counselors. And there's a list that you can look up. You put in your zip code, and you can search it, and anything it'll say like this genetic counselor is open to talking to students. And I just blanket emailed everybody, and I got one woman back, so I shadowed her a couple of times, and then I was able to get a slot to volunteer in a hospital. um, and then I worked at a company called SIO2 as a scientist intern, and I worked under a PhD who taught me a lot about molecular biology and molecular diagnostics. And so working in R&D kind of led me to a different route, and we'll cover those in some of these other questions. I'll pass the mic.
Cool. Yeah, I had already mentioned volunteering in a lab as an undergrad, but I really just tried to absorb as much information as I could while I was in a lab. I don't know how many other people in this room are like psych or neuro majors, but I guess like the best advice I could say is just try and learn as much as you can when you're in a lab. After I graduated, like I said, I worked full time in one lab for a couple of years. And then I got introduced to a new type of research, memory research, which is what I'm currently doing. But I didn't know anything about it at the time. So I ended up taking a second like research assistant position, where I was working under a woman who like focused on like hippocampal like memory function. And there I really like got to like dive in and like learn a lot of the theories about memory, a lot of theories of hippocampal function. So I think, yeah, the best experience is just, trying to learn as much as I can from everybody in the lab, trying to soak up as much information as I can from grad students, from postdoctoral researchers, from the PI themselves. Yeah, that's probably what prepared me the most for grad school.
Yeah, so like I said earlier, I had a really good research-based internship where I got to do a bunch of work that kind of helped build into grad school type research. But I also got really lucky in that my mom also did electrical engineering graduate school, so she was able to kind of give me a rough lay of the landscape. But also, I think something that that's really beneficial is to kind of build good rapport with some of your professors to really get like, especially ones that are closer to the immediate application process, because they're really good resources in helping you understand what admissions officers may be looking for, what's like good to emphasize, what's good to just, in general talk about. And so, yeah, I had some good math professors I was able to talk with them about.
Excellent. So, how did you organize yourself while you were searching for schools in your program?
So many spreadsheets. It was mostly for me location based because I'm in California. I've got two kids. They're well now 14 and 10, and their dad lives here, and I really didn't want to take them away. So it's like, okay, well, what's available to me here? What's available to me within driving distance? So spreadsheets, name, distance, how much, the amenities or whatever that they could offer. But yeah, lots of spreadsheets.
Yeah, similarly, just spreadsheets, just yeah, full of information. I did my search based on mentor advisor fit. So I knew that I was interested in sticking in memory, like a specific subgenre of memory, like called adaptive memory. So I kind of like just listed out the people that did that. And then I went to their, like if they had a website, I went to their website, see if they were accepting grad students, would put them in my spreadsheet, and then just kind of kept doing that. Eventually I would like narrow it down more. Like I would talk to my advisor who, like, I know this is one of the questions later, so I guess I won't double dip here, but just a lot of spreadsheets.
Yeah, I don't mean to kind of reiterate, but yeah, just Excel. So just like kind of just having a bunch of like rows for different schools, and then have different columns for, you know, what type of requirements or like what things they can offer you, just kind of sorting everything like that. Yeah, I don't have much else beyond that.
Okay, so Sarah has actually been able to join us. Apparently she was stuck with the hurricane.
So sorry.
That's okay. We picked a great night to do this, right? So just if you could just introduce yourself and then I guess dive right into the next question. How did you decide which schools to apply to?
Yeah, so hi, my name's Sarah. I'm a first year PhD student in linguistics at Stony Brook. My cat is in the background. You'll probably hear and see him. Sorry about that. And yeah, I guess like deciding which schools to apply to, I think it was really important for me to have like a list of non-negotiables. So a big thing for me was having 2 to 3 professors that I'd be willing to work with, willing to be advised by, because just having one, like, you never know, things happen. People take sabbaticals, people take jobs elsewhere. And so kind of like when I was thinking about which schools to apply to, I started off with a broader list, and then I came up with things that I was like, I have to have this in the program, and that's how I narrowed down the list.
Okay, I'll go. For me, like again, it was location. There was only there's 3 genetic counseling programs that are near me that within driving distance, and then one that was online. So I applied to all of them. And genetic counseling is extremely competitive to get into. The class sizes are between 8 and 12 people. And I think in 2020, there was 30 applicants per slot at UC Irvine. So you really have to stand out, and most people apply to a lot of schools, but like I said, I was kind of stuck in California, but yeah, so that was the main thing. And my current school, I kind of applied to on a whim because it was like, why not? And now here I am. So I don't recommend that though if you're a super planner.
Yeah, I kind of said this in the last one. I decided which schools to apply to based on which like professors were there doing research that I was interested in. So as I said, I kind of had like a general idea. Like when you're applying to grad school, particularly in psychology, like it's good to have a general idea of like what type of research you like to do, what type of research you would want to continue to do for 5 to 7 years. So I found all of those professors, and then I would just talk to my advisor and other people in my lab, like, do you know this person? Do you know people in their lab? How is it for them? You know, not all advisors are created equally. So some places, like my former advisor would be like, oh, you don't want to work with that person, or oh, I don't know if that would be a good fit for you. Like, so it's really like relying on sort of just what other people know about it. Like I see this comment in the chat about advisor fit, and I think what Sarah put is also really important, like getting an idea of like what their advising style is like, and you can learn that stuff from other grad students, from other PIs that you're comfortable and familiar enough with. So yeah, but I basically decided which schools to apply to based on like who was doing the type of memory research I was interested in.
Yeah. So when I was applying to grad school, I was kind of split on whether I wanted to do more applied math or more theoretical electrical engineering, because they're very close in fields. So I applied to probably more schools than I ought to in kind of each. But that being said, it is really good to know kind of what focal area you want to go in, into in grad school, and to look for advisors in those areas. Which, because that's I've had it described this way multiple times. Kind of what you get your PhD in is kind of the seed for your career to grow into. Like that's kind of your starting point. So it's always important to kind of get that right. So yeah, definitely look for advisors. And there are a lot of other requirements. I think somebody said location. That's another good one. Depends on where you're willing to go. There's definitely you can definitely look at other things like stipend amount, healthcare, just anything that really is something you care about. It's good to look at those, and that definitely kind of bleeds into the previous question about how do you organize yourself. But yeah, that's kind of, yeah.
So the next question kind of leads off the previous question, and you may have already answered it. I'm not sure if you had a choice. I mean, if you only got into one school, but how did you choose which to attend if you had to choose?
Do you want me to go first again? So
Yeah,
with
go ahead.
counseling, they use the match system. So you sign an agreement saying that if you're selected, if you're matched with a school, you have to go. It's a little interesting, but I did not match with any after my interviews, and I have a suspicion as to why, but it was a good thing that I didn't, because after working in R&D and working as a genetic counseling assistant, I realized I wanted to be on more of the proactive side of genetics rather than the reactive side. So a genetic counselor you go to when things have already gone bad, and they just run your DNA and say, oh yeah, you have these mutations, and go back to the doctor, like, good luck. There's really not much else you can do other than tell your family members. And I just kind of, I don't know, it was kind of like, that stinks. What else can we do? So after working in research and development, it's like, let's be ahead of this then. Let's not wait until somebody gets sick and you're just like, have fun, like, I don't know, it didn't fit for me anymore. So I started looking for schools that had genetics and as a master's, and I found mine. So I applied on a whim, and here I am.
Can I just ask a question real quick? I was wondering, what did you mean by matched to a program?
So the National Match System is a website that a lot of different schools use. I know med schools use them to match their students with where they want to do residency. So I go on there and I list the schools that I applied, and then I rank them like 1, 2, 3, 4. And then after you interview, the schools will then rank you. And there's like this algorithm where I could be selected as a number 1 for all of the schools, but if I only pick this one school as my number 1, they'll put me there. It's really interesting, and it kind of takes some of the pressure off of being like, oh, I applied to 10 schools and I got into 10. Like, oh no, what do I do? But then on the flip side, it's like, oh, okay, well, this was my second choice. Did I even get ranked on my first one? And so there's some wishy-washy feelings about it.
Thank you for sharing. I never heard of that before.
I guess I can jump in. One of the things that was really important for me in deciding which school to attend was talking to current grad students at that school. So I don't actually think I would be at Stony Brook right now if that hadn't happened. I was thinking of going to another program, and I talked to grad students at that program and grad students at my current program. And found out a lot of negative stuff about the program that had been my first choice and a lot of positive stuff about where I am now. So that was hugely formative in my decision. And I think another thing is just like looking at research coming out of that department, and asking yourself if that's something that you could see yourself doing for 5 years. Because like if you're doing a PhD, that is a big commitment, and just thinking like, is that something that I see myself doing long term? And is this something that I see myself like being interested in long term?
Yeah, that's really good advice to try and just get as much information as you can from current grad students. Not all of them are going to be in a position where they can like tell you negative things. So like sometimes you kind of have to like read between the lines a little bit. Like if somebody's being a little sketchy, like about, you know, the advisor, like, I don't know, maybe take that as a hint. I said I only applied to 7. I ended up getting interviews from 2. It came down to Temple and University of Oregon. The grad students like spoke so highly of both labs. The departments were pretty solid. I had been coming from a university that like had a really like toxic sort of department. So like both universities seemed like such a breath of fresh air. So ultimately it just came down to advisor sort of research fit. And while both of them were in this sort of same memory field, one of them was like a little more leaning towards like some other like particular aspects. Like, so I do human memory research, but I was also interested in human drug addiction. And the advisor that I currently work with, Deepu Murthy, he has like some interest in that as well. So like ultimately that was the deciding factor. It was a pretty difficult decision though, that I like flip-flopped on for a really long time before I made the decision.
Yeah, so largely the same, reaching out to advisors and their students. It's best if you can talk with the students kind of away from their advisor. That's always, if it's kind of a red flag if the advisor won't let you talk to the students without their presence. But yeah, just try to talk to advisors and students. I think I reached out to like, between the 2 schools I was considering, I reached out to like 8+ advisors and tried to talk with as many. I would have talked with more had I had more time to make that decision. I don't know how it works for other fields. Largely for engineering, there are a bunch of schools who try to have the deadline be, I think it's mid-April, maybe like April 12th or something, where everyone tries to make their decision by, so that you can kind of just like all the schools will let you know if you got in, and then you can make your decision by then. It doesn't always work out that way. Some schools are late and stuff like that. So take that with not a grain of salt, but just keep that in mind. When it came to actually picking UIUC, I was lucky in that advisors at both schools were very kind of candid about what was like good here and what would be good at other places. And so it was actually one of the advisors at the second school I was recommending was like, hey, this school is pretty good and you'll find people who will do research in the areas you want. So that, in combination with just talking with advisors and students, really made me confident with my decision.
So did you consider what support networks exist in the department or graduate school in general before applying?
I guess I just have a question. What do you guys mean by support networks? Like,
So it's kind of a general question regarding scholarships, fellowships. Did you have to TA or an RA? Or even, I mean, 2 of you, I think mentioned being parents. So were there support networks in place that helped with that also?
cool. Yeah, I see. Yeah, it's something I should have mentioned in the last question was when I was deciding between the 2, at my Temple where I ended up going, I didn't have to TA, and at the other university I would have had to, which was like kind of a deciding factor, but not the biggest one. So I guess I definitely asked about that stuff though. I asked about if I'd have to TA the first year. I did end up getting I think I got a fellowship to cover TAing for my first 2 semesters and my like summer here at Temple. I might have gotten offered something similar at Oregon as well. I don't remember anymore. I hadn't I hadn't become a parent yet. Actually, my she's just about to turn 1 tomorrow, so I hadn't considered that yet. But definitely like funding. Like I was definitely asking advisors about funding. Thank you.
Yeah, it's definitely yeah, for me, I was in general, for most engineering schools, you'll be able to like they will almost always get you a TA position if you don't get an RA position or a fellowship. Kind of the main difference being, TAs are you help teach a class, maybe that's grading, maybe that's teaching discussion sections. It can be a variety of things. Research is, helping with research, and fellowship is just fellowships can come in a variety of flavors, but the better ones are just kind of money to go there. And there are benefits to each one. And it's definitely good to look at like kind of some of the like how much stipend pays, your health, like how much healthcare you get from it, and a variety of other things. The benefit of doing like an RA is you kind of get slotted in with a professor, and then you can kind of transition that into your thesis advisor if you'd like. But you're kind of doing research from the get-go, which can be pretty exciting, especially if that's why you want to be at grad school. The benefits of being like a TA and a fellowship is that you can kind of search around for more advisors. That's kind of where I'm at. UIUC requires to TA at least 1 semester. So I'm kind of getting it out of the way now, but I also get to search around for thesis advisors and really try to narrow in on who I want to work with without having to immediately commit. Yeah.
I'll pop in. For genetic counseling, I didn't really consider anything because honestly, I didn't know. It wasn't until the interviews that they mentioned something about a fellowship. And there was 2 options. One was just like a guaranteed like couple $1,000s off of your tuition. And then another one was you wrote an essay and you got an extra couple thousand on top of that. Other than that, there's not a whole lot with genetic counseling. You do clinical rotations. And there's no support for that. So that was another reason why I was kind of glad that I didn't go that route, because single mom, I got 2 kids, and all of the clinics that I would be rotating with were, you guys are in California. I'm like halfway between LA and San Diego, and everything would be in the LA area. And that's 3 hours of traffic at least. So driving around doing that and then trying to get home to my kids, it wouldn't have worked. And there was somebody that was at the hospital that I volunteered with who did it as a single mom, but she also lived out there. So I went to talk to her about it and she was like, oh yeah, as long as you live nearby. And it was like, nope. So like, okay, well, that sucks. But yeah, so that kind of worked out for me as well. With this school, as far as I know right now, there's nothing that I need to do. I did volunteer to be a TA for Dr. Holichek. That was really fun. I was an ATA and a TA. And then I took time off being a TA so I could work on my personal statements and everything. And it's really hard to actually get back in. So I was a TA once and I kept bugging her like every session. It was like, hey, do you need someone? So it never happened again, which is a big bummer, but I am a little overwhelmed now, so it's okay. But I liked TAing, but I think that's just me.
I enjoyed, I was in that class and I enjoyed seeing you TA, and it was really cool that you introduced us to a little bit of behind the scenes. So just spoken from somebody that saw you in action, I appreciated it.
Well, good, I'm glad. Yeah, that was my
Yeah.
old lab. That was just like blood all over the place. I explained all of that stuff to my new lab people and they're like, ew. Like, it's just how it is. We're testing blood. So yeah.
I guess I can jump in and try and address Kay's question in the chat as to like why grad programs require grad students to TA. At least in my grad program, you get lines of funding from like the graduate school. So the department gets the lines of funding and then those are allocated to students, and that's like how the students get their stipend. But in exchange, they're expected to work for the graduate school as a TA. And so it's not necessarily that you're required to TA as much as it is you're required to TA to get funding. But I think like what can be really helpful and what was really helpful for me is external funding. So this kind of goes back to like the question of deciding schools to apply to and like whether or not you look at stipends then versus you look at stipends when like you're deciding where to go. And I think both are valid. And obviously I think, you know, there are different factors that will weigh differently for different people. But for me, I applied to a lot of external funding. And so I didn't look so much at the stipends of the grad departments that I was applying to because I thought, okay, there's a chance and like I will know, I'll have all of my like cards in April and I'll know like, do I actually have the external funding? Am I able to go to a department that doesn't have a great stipend? So I do have the NSF GRFP. If people are applying for that, want to talk about that, like feel free to shoot me a DM. But that was also what allowed me to go to my current program because Stony Brook being a state school is like, they don't have a ton of money. So I do make significantly more than people that are on the base stipend just because I have NSF. And that's like, if you are eligible to apply to NSF, apply to NSF. If you're eligible to apply to NDSEG, apply to them. They're great, they're fantastic. And you don't have to TA if you have them because your funding's coming from a different source than the grad school.
Yeah, to quickly piggyback off of that, another reason why you may do it, like why you may be required to TA, is a lot of grad students can go on to be professors after they graduate rather than going into industry. At least that's how it is in engineering. So TAing is kind of a good way to get a flavor for what teaching is like without, you know, being immediately thrown into the water. So you can kind of learn like, do you like this? Do you dislike this? What are kind of the good and bad parts? So yeah.
Cool, thanks.
So before we move on to the next question, I just wanted to make sure Sarah had a chance to answer this question with the support networks. Do you feel like you answered totally, or were you just talking about TAing and that sort of thing?
I think those were like my main answers. Let me double check my notes really quick.
Sure.
Yeah, oh, the other thing that I would just kind of mention is like, don't just look at the stipend, look at the other things that are covered. So like my grad school also has like $1,000 so like grad activity fee that you have to pay, see if that's covered. A lot of stuff will kind of come up that's like not very explicitly listed in the funding package. Also health insurance, are you paying for that yourself? Do you get a discounted rate? Is the school paying for you? Those are big differences. So do some digging there because they won't necessarily make that very apparent in the offer letter.
Yeah, one way of getting at that is like asking if there's a grad student union. They like, if there is one, they'll be more than happy to talk to you when you're interviewing or after you've gotten an offer or something like that. Yeah, my university doesn't have we don't have a very strong union, but yeah, yeah.
Okay, excellent. So the next question is,
You are cutting out a little bit, Kristen.
Might be a Wi-Fi connection issue as she gets
Yeah.
reconnected.
I'll ask the question.
I was gonna
Did
say,
you
thank
find
you.
a PA or PI lab before applying? What are the important questions to ask potential advisors? My answer is no and no, because I said I applied on a whim. So moving on.
I guess I was kind of a unique case because my current advisor was the PhD student of my undergrad advisor. So I actually already knew him and already had worked with him before I applied to the program, which I think worked out really well for me. But I think more generally, like a really good question to ask potential advisors is like both about their advising style, which I touched on earlier, like, you know, how often do they like to meet with their advisees? How like what kind of feedback do they give? What kind of expectations do they have? Those kind of questions are really good to ask. And then also ask them about what future directions they're interested in their research. So I had a couple of instances when like I was thinking about potential advisors and I asked them like, you know, oh, what are you thinking of doing over like the next 5 years or something? And there was a big pivot that they were thinking of doing that I wouldn't have known if I hadn't asked and if I'd been going based off of research that they published like 2 years ago and wanting to work on that stuff. And then they decided they didn't want to work on it anymore, that obviously would have been a problem. So I think that's another good thing to ask them about.
Yeah, 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 I think Sarah brings up a few good points there. Yeah, talking to your current advisor about other people they know or have worked with, that's a really good resource in like finding good PIs. Important questions. I actually just pulled up what my questions were. I hadn't looked at this in a long time. Sarah mentioned a couple of them already. Definitely, I think one question that was interesting to me is like, what would I be working on if I was in their lab? So like sometimes they'll have a grant already for a certain project and they'll be like they'll just want to put you like they'll just want to throw you on a project right when you get there, just so you have like something to like sort of play with when you're like just starting out in grad school. So that was an interesting question. If they like had data lying around, or if like you were going to be starting an experiment from scratch, for instance. Yeah, and I like one thing I also did before even applying is I did like a lot of pre-application interviews. So like I would reach out to everybody. I reached out to everybody I applied to A, see if they were accepting grad students, and B, seeing if they would want to like connect or something prior to even like me submitting an application, just to see if there was any sort of research fit or like if we had a rapport. So I would recommend doing, I don't know, I don't know how translatable that is to other fields. Maybe if somebody else on the panel has done something similar. But for psychology and neuroscience, that's pretty common nowadays.
Yeah, I did not find a PI/lab before applying. I definitely talked with a lot, but again, I'm doing a TA now and still kind of looking. But yeah, I think it's really important to look for PIs before applying. It's especially good if you can talk with them before applying, because as I understand it, if there is a professor who really wants to work with you and you apply, when it's kind of getting down to if you get in, generally that professor will kind of pull their weight and you have a better odds of getting in, as I understand it. But yeah, so definitely when it comes to questions about you want to ask potential advisors, definitely managerial style. There's some professors who really kind of breathe down your neck, and that's good pressure for some people, but sometimes it's overwhelming for others. There's some professors who are really laid back, and they kind of let you do the driving, but if you struggle with like actually getting stuff done without any pressure, it kind of can not work well. So definitely, it's definitely good to share interests and want to work on the same thing as them, but also seeing if you fit with the advisor is equally as important. Yeah, how many times they meet with their students, that's another good one, because if you're in, and to that matter, how big their groups are, because if the group is exceptionally large and they don't get to meet with you a lot, then you may not have quite the necessary like directing, or they might not be able to give you like as much direction as if you were in a smaller group and they met more often. But yeah, so yeah, and then again, talking with students can help you get like a good gist of how they like to work beyond what they're just saying.
Okay, did everyone answer that question? Just want to make sure before I go on to the next one, because I got cut off for a second. Okay, so what should be included in your personal statement? What do you think made you stand out as a good candidate for your program?
So I think I offer a lot of different advice here because again, I'm in my mid 30s and all of my experience is being a military wife and being a mom. And it was like, okay, just write about it then. So I did. I wrote about my experiences there and how that would help me. And then, just really let your passions shine. You know, name a lot when it comes to like what you are trying to show that don't really sit there and write about, oh yeah, I know this and know that. It's like, okay, well then why are you going to grad school? If you already know these things, why do you know? Like what are you doing? You need to demonstrate that you are teachable. So say like the things that you learned that really stuck with you and that you want to learn more about it or more in this way. But it's grad schools want you to be teachable, not somebody who's like, I'm going to go because I want those extra letters after my name. I already know these things. Like, no, you don't. And demonstrate that.
Yeah, so I think a good way, like a good way to describe it is the dichotomy between undergrad and graduate school is like, for undergrad, the colleges are trying to build like a class. They're looking for well-rounded people. You take gen eds, that's kind of their shtick. For grad school, they're trying to build researchers. So when you're writing your essays, it should kind of reflect that. The way I wrote my essay and kind of how I was advised to by professors was, you want to really build your personal statement into why you would be good. Why would you be good as a researcher in your field, and kind of what relevant life experiences have kind of you can pull into to really exemplify that. And obviously it's good if you want to customize, well, you probably should customize it per individual school, because that shows that you've really looked into the school and like speak about why you'd be a good fit there specifically. So the way I wrote my essay was just kind of building into like why I wanted to go, how my academics have kind of influenced me as to why I go and how they support me as a good student, and then how my internship kind of again builds into why I would be good at doing research in this field and why I really want to go. Again, as I believe the earlier person said, yeah, letting your passion shine is really a good thing to do here.
Yeah, I think Jackie and Nick both bring up really great points. Like what piggybacking off what Jackie said, like, yeah, any sort of adversity that you faced is really good to bring up. I almost failed out of college. I ended up graduating with like a 2.6 or 7, I don't know, but like it wasn't very good. And I think most people, when they have that sort of GPA, they wouldn't even bother applying. I didn't actually put it in my personal statement. And one woman, I did a pre-application interview with her. She really liked me, went well. And then I applied, and she like called me and was like, why didn't you mention your GPA in your personal statement? Like, it's like, what? She was really mad at me actually, and then didn't end up inviting me for an interview. So if you have anything like that, I would definitely bring it up. If there's anything on your application that would make somebody look twice at, bring it up. And you don't like, yeah, just, I don't know. Yeah, just bring it up, talk about it, talk about why. For me, I'm a first generation college student. My parents didn't graduate high school, so they just couldn't relate. I was very lost. I had to like work to support myself in college. I was just kind of busy with like all these other things, and like I just had a lot of imposter syndrome. And these are all things that would have been great to put in a personal statement that I did not put in mine. And then I think Nick brought up a lot of good points about tailoring your statement to the school. Definitely do that. Like the last paragraph of my statement was always dedicated to like 2 to 3 researchers at that university, why I liked the research, how I think I could fit into it. And the rest of my statement was basically showing, similar to what Nick said, like showing that I can talk and think like a researcher. Here's all the research I did, and I'm not just telling you about it. Here's like, let me set up the hypotheses. Let me let me like motivate the like paradigm with these questions. Let me interpret the results. Let me just, really just try to like, yeah, just show that you can write and think and talk like a researcher.
Yeah, I think those are all really great points. I think I'll start by echoing the making it specific to the school. I think several people brought up like with the choosing schools, like keeping a spreadsheet. And for me, it was helpful to also just have a column in that spreadsheet of like, what are my specific reasons for this school that I'm going to put into my personal statement? And that helped me keep track when I went to like write my 12 different personal statements. Don't do that. And then I think to Nicholas's point, which is a really important one, I also faced some adversity during my undergrad. And in my first 2 years, my GPA was very bad, and I was able to turn things around kind of midway through sophomore year. And I did talk about that in my personal statement, and I think that ended up working in my favor because I was able to kind of put a spin on it of, I was far away from home. I was dealing with different forms of discrimination and et cetera. And that kind of made me see like, well, in academia, there's this problem and I want to solve it. And so part of the reason that I'm going to grad school is so that, when I become a professor, I'm going to be able to solve these issues. And I think that probably ended up helping me rather than people just seeing like great stuff on my transcript and not having the context of it. The final point I'll make is something that I really struggled with writing the personal statement, at least for the programs that I was applying to, is that several of them required a personal statement and a research statement. And for me, like knowing what stuff goes in each was really challenging. What I ended up figuring out that worked decently for me is that it's okay to talk about the same stuff in both, but you talk about it in different ways. So like if you're talking about some kind of research that you did, some kind of research experience in your personal statement, you talk about it in a very narrative sense. So you say like, what got you excited about the project? What did you learn in it? And how did that get you to where you are now, and the goals that you have and the questions that you want to ask in grad school? And then if you're talking about that same project in a research statement, you're going to talk about the project kind of more technically. You're going to say, what did you contribute? What skills did you gain? How does that make you qualified for the program? A lot more like you would like on lines in your CV or your resume.
To build on that, a lot of my schools had a statement of purpose and a personal statement. And so like with my personal statement, I talked about how I lived on Guam for 3 years and experienced a lot of the food shortages, and that led to a lot of health problems for the people of Guam. So then for my statement of purpose, my purpose was to find out, because one, there's no genetic counselor on Guam. So I really wanted to get in there and see like what's going on with the higher instances of diabetes and like other non-communicable diseases, but mainly diabetes. Is it just because they live in a food desert, or does inbreeding have something to do? Because it is a tiny island and everybody's cousins. So is there something that has cause them to be more predisposed to this, and the environment is just not helping whatsoever? And so that's like what you were saying, Sarah, you got a touch of the personal and then why you want to dig into that and on the more technical side. And I am going to agree with the Nicks over here. Definitely, you said it in a very nice way. I'm going to say it in a very crude way. Kiss those schools' asses. Like, you find out what it is, and oh, I love that this researcher does this, and I love that. Like with UC Irvine, they worked a lot with the Children's Hospital that worked with type 1 diabetes. And it was like, oh, I'm really interested in that, and I love that you've got this cooperation with them. And it was really like, all right, laying it on a little thick there, but you got to do what you got to do, man. So
Yeah, I really appreciate that nuance between the personal statement and the research statement. So moving on to question 9. How did you develop your relationship with professors or mentors that you could ask for a letter of recommendation from them?
So I'll go. I don't know. Are there other 3 of you? Were you online students with ASU? Or no?
No.
No? Okay. So I'll talk to just the online students here. Go to your office hours. Go to your office hours, whether you understand the material or not, go. Make yourself present, ask questions, even if they're the most boneheaded questions ever, make yourself there. And even if it is a boneheaded question, respond appropriately and just, again, show that you're teachable. Because I had one teacher, I'm not going to name names, but he wanted me to put together a portfolio. And so I did. And he said, this just demonstrates that you're a good student. I'm not writing one for you. And it was like, what just happened? Like, that's what you asked me to do. But he didn't hold office hours either. So that was kind of a stupid move. But and then with Dr. Holichek, she had office hours and I would go, even though I understood. And people don't really want to talk when they're on Zoom things, because yeah, it's weird. You're sitting in a room talking to yourself. But I mean, again, stay-at-home mom, I did that for like 10 years. So at least somebody's going to answer back that's coherent. And so they would ask a question, who has the answer for this? It was like, all right, I guess it's me again, So definitely speak up and make yourself seen. And if there's no office hours, use the discussion boards. Just really try to not blend in, which is really hard because it is very difficult to try to sell yourself, but that is what you're doing. You're trying to sell yourself to get a bill of goods from that teacher later on. So just be there, be present.
Yeah, that's such great advice. I wish you could have told me that 10 years ago, like, because I did not do that. I didn't have a letter of rec from any of my professors. As I said, I didn't do very well in undergrad, so there was not any, I couldn't have asked any of them. I didn't go to office hours. All of my letters of rec were from people that knew me from research. So I said I worked in 2 labs, one as undergrad, then they hired me after I graduated, and then a second lab in New York. So those were 2 letters there. And then in my second lab, I got closely mentored by a postdoctoral researcher. So he ended up writing my 3rd letter for me. It's not great to have like 2 letters from one lab, but I kind of didn't really have another option because, like, I mean, as I said, I didn't have like a professor that I could reach out to, and I'd only been in 2 labs. So yeah, I think Jackie really, I wish I could have heard that 10 years ago.
Yeah, I will also echo that point. I think going to office hours in my notes just in caps, because I think it's like the most important thing that you can do. I think linguistics may be a little bit unique in this because we are a very small field. But if you happen to have like upper level seminar courses that are going to be smaller that you can take in your field, those can also be really great, especially ones that have a final project, because you can, work on something that's doesn't have to be like full on research, but, show the professor like, hey, I'm able to ask these questions and take the first steps in trying to answer them. And oftentimes, at least in linguistics, we'll have seminars that have like 4 people in them. And so you really get to build a relationship with the professor that way. That's actually how I got involved in research during my undergrad. Was I took a seminar, I did the final project, and then continued it for 2 years. So that's, I think, very helpful. And I think if you do end up doing research in undergrad, which I would obviously encourage if you're able to, having regular one-on-one meetings with whoever you're working with can be very helpful, just to show that like you're there, being a constant presence, which I think gets back to Jackie's point too, is, in office hours, that's one way to be a constant presence, and having regular meetings with your research advisor, your PI, that's another way to be a constant presence. Just don't let them forget you, basically, and don't blend in.
Yeah, pretty much all of that. Yeah, office hours are very good. Again, I got lucky in that I had 2 professors, like for 2 math professors that I had like 3 classes with each or something like that. And so I was able to ask them for math, but for electrical engineering, I didn't really have anybody. And I kind of had to ask a professor I wasn't super close with, which it worked out for the best. I'm happy where I'm at, but it definitely could have gone a lot better. So that is something I wish I had known. I've found it's hard for me to ask questions when I feel like I understand the material. So what I try to do is I try to formulate a question that ties in multiple components from the class, or just really looking at like a broader picture, like that demonstrates forward thinking with the material you're learning about. And part of this is, it's good to ask questions for this type of letter of rec, but also, I think it's good to just do it because you're interested in the material. And if you really are interested in the material and asking questions from that type of perspective, it'll really come across to the professor. So yeah, just again, make sure the professors know who you are, and office hours and asking questions are great for that. One other thing I will say is when it comes to letters of rec, I think at least in engineering, it's best to ask people you've done research with first, just because they, having done research with you, they kind of know you from that perspective, which is something you may not, that a professor may not get. And again, grad schools are trying to get you to be a good researcher and trying to make sure that you will succeed as a researcher. So people who can talk to your strengths about researching are really good.
I have one last tip. It's not so much about asking for letters of recommendation, but when you're applying and you submit these things, a lot of the times they will send an email to whomever you add on there, but there is a box that, because you have a right, I can't remember like what it's called, but you have a right to read your letters of recommendation. Waive that right. Because if you don't waive that right, that shows the school that you don't exactly trust what that person's going to say about you, and you want to know. So waive that right, because that shows that you have complete trust in whomever you asked, and that you trust that they have your best interest, and that it's going to be a great letter. So yeah, check the box and waive that right.
I guess one other quick point with like when you get to that point where you're actually submitting the requests, most of the applications, at least when I applied, will let you go in and submit the request before you submit any of your other application materials. So do that early, do that like a month in advance, and then send the professors emails, when you do it. And then, a couple weeks before the deadline, 1 week, and then like every day. It will feel excessive. You'll feel like you're being annoying, but it's normal. And they're busy, it's fine, but bug them, make sure they get them in.
They always wait until the last minute too. Like even Dr. Holacek, she was like, oh yeah, I'm going to write you a great one. And that was like months in advance. And then it was like, every time I'd refresh the page and go check on it, I was like, what is she doing? So I had her, I would text her like, hey, just a reminder. And she's like, oh, I know, I'll get to it. And I don't know, I think they wait to the last minute because I don't know. I'm not even gonna try to speak for it, but I don't know. They wait until the last minute. And that was even my boss at SiO2, he wrote one for me and I saw him every day. And it was like, Will, what are you doing? William, come on. And he's like, yeah, I'll get to it. So I don't know, be patient. That's another thing. Yeah.
Excellent advice. So our next question is, for the interview portion, how did you prepare for this, and what types of questions did they ask? What did you ask also? Because I know you get a chance to ask them questions too.
So for this one, for when I interviewed with the genetic counseling programs, I can't remember the name of the company, but they offered sessions with somebody that you would pay and they would give you a mock interview. And a lot of it for genetic counseling has to do with empathy. Can you empathize with the person that you're giving bad news to? Can you explain the genetics and in an easy to digest type way? Because some of it really isn't easy to digest. And they would ask, like, can you explain to me the mode of inheritance of cystic fibrosis? And you would have to explain the mode of inheritance and the percentage of the chance of getting it from each child, and the person who gave me mine, she said, most people just say that a couple's chance of having a child who has cystic fibrosis is 25%. And you were correct, because it was every child has a 25% chance, depending on, the parent's carrying status. But you said every child has a chance, and that is the difference. Every child has a chance, not just, oh, all of your children, 25%. So some of the questions will be technical like that. Others will be, one of the questions was, what was a difficult situation you had in one of your volunteering situations? So for me, it was crisis text line. And there's one in particular that was somebody who did have suicidal idea. Oh my God, I can't say the word, who was suicidal. And I had to talk them down off of it. And it was intense. And luckily with that website that I volunteered with, there is somebody also there with you that's like guiding you and reading it. So you're not completely alone, but it was still like crap. Like that's a lot of pressure, and it's so hard to do the correct listening styles, and you can't sit there and be like, I totally get it. You can't say things like that. It's a different way of thinking and communicating. And instead of saying like, oh, I completely understand, you have to say like, oh, you're very brave for communicating that. That's very much against my nature. I'm a fixer. And so that's probably a good thing why I didn't do genetic counseling. I'll just fix their genetics first. But yeah, that was really interesting. There's going to be technical questions, and then those types of questions. And then there was a lot of personal ones too. Like on my application, I wrote that I was a Girl Scout troop leader. And apparently that was very rare because everybody asked about that. And that was kind of odd, but okay.
Yeah, I guess my interviews weren't super, they didn't ask so many, I don't know. I guess they asked technical questions. I think that it's just different. For the most part, we just talked about research. We just talked about the work they were doing, the work I would maybe be doing with them. It was a lot of like, I explained my research a lot, the research I had done. I was on a few papers already, a couple as a middle author, and then two as a first author. So those papers came up a lot. One thing, like, so on my interview days, I was interviewed by the advisor that I wanted to work with, but that I met with like so many other people in the department as well. And one unique piece of advice that somebody gave me for when I was interviewing with these other people that I wasn't going to be working with is like, just like sort of, pretend, but not really pretend. Like, this might be the only time that you have this person in a room for 30 minutes. Like, there's one woman at the University of Oregon, her name is Dasha Zaifimova, not that that means anything, but like, she does such cool reward and memory research. And like, I had tried doing reward research before and I failed at it. And I just went into that interview thinking like, this might be the only time I ever sit down with her and can just talk about research. And that's how I treated it. And it sort of took off a lot of pressure, weirdly. So yeah, I think yeah, for the most part, we like just spent a long time talking shop, talking theories and ideas. And yeah, I don't know. At the time I was really nervous and scared, but like looking back, it was fun. It was a lot of fun. Like, and like to this day, I have not talked to Dasha ever again. So like, I'm glad I took advantage of that unique opportunity.
Yeah, I think my interview experience was probably fairly similar to yours in terms of like what we talked about. I wish someone had told me to think about it the way that you just framed it, because that's a lot healthier than what I was doing, which was just panicking. But to prepare, I did some practice interviews. I think practice interviews are really the best way to prepare. And perhaps like a slightly unpopular opinion is maybe do one first where you just don't prepare at all and see where you stumble, and then use that to prepare better for the next practice interviews if you do several. That was what really helped me. And some of my interviews honestly just didn't go well. And that's okay. Everything ended up going fine. I ended up getting into the programs I wanted to get into. So I would say don't panic too much if an interview doesn't go well. Especially in linguistics, people are very much in camps with their theories. And I interviewed at grad programs that were in a different camp than my undergrad. And so I ended up getting attacked because of my undergrad advisor's views that were different from my potential grad advisor's views. But you know, what that told me was this isn't a healthy department to be in, because you don't do that to a senior in college. And so it ended up just being assigned to me that this isn't somewhere that I want to go anyway. I did end up getting into that department. Doesn't really make sense. But I think, you know, don't panic too much if like 1 or 2 interviews don't go that well. And don't put like all your weight on one interview, or tell yourself that like this is the interview that I have to nail, because you have multiple options. Some of them might not go okay, and that's okay. And sometimes it doesn't even, like, you'll feel like something won't go well and then you'll still get in. So yeah, I wouldn't overthink it. I think the way Nicholas framed it was very healthy.
Yeah, I don't know if it's less common in math and engineering, but I didn't have too many interviews. I had one that was explicitly told it was going to be an interview, which it was just talking about a problem I was interested in for 10 minutes, which the trouble there was just kind of stretching it out to 10 minutes. That one didn't go super well. I don't have much to say on that, but the other one I was not aware was an interview going in, but it was a bunch of questions that maybe I could have known, but also it wasn't super important that I didn't know them, because the questions were more getting at how I was approaching, like, even though I didn't know the answer. Had I known the answer, I could have just said the answer and it would have been done. But because I didn't know it, they were able to get a glimpse into how I thought about problems, which is a very important part about being a researcher. So even if you don't know answers to like maybe questions that have strict answers, you can still kind of, as long as you can like demonstrate that you're thinking about it in a certain way and like that comes across strong, it could still be a very good experience for you, and it could be very good for getting into that school. I did visit some colleges or some grad schools after getting accepted. I'm only bringing that up because I did talk with a bunch of advisors there in a kind of interviewish style, but that was more akin to just asking, or more akin to the question earlier about talking about PIs and labs. Yeah.
One other thing, if they ask a question that you don't know the answer to, it's totally fine to say that. You know, again, this is showing that you're teachable and being humble enough to say, you know, I don't know enough about that. Could you maybe give me a little bit more information? And sometimes they will trip you up that way. I didn't experience that in my actual interviews, but I do wonder if the cystic fibrosis question in my mock interview was supposed to be like that. But I'm a nerd, so I already knew. But so I just be teachable, you know, show that you can say, you know, I don't know, and then ask a follow-up question and try to formulate an answer, and then just say that is something that I would have to work more on. One thing, like I said about the crisis text line, I brought that up saying that I am a fixer. So it is something that I need to work on and learn more about, on being available to people, to be emotional and just be there to support them, and not sit there and be like, we're going to fix this, we're going to get to the bottom of it. And one of the interviewers I talked to later, she was like, I really liked that you said that wasn't your strong suit, because everybody goes in there saying, oh, I'm so compassionate, I'm so empathetic. And it's like, okay, that's great if you are. I am too, but I'm also, I know, I'm very well aware that I'm a fixer. And that is something I'm going to have to unlearn and then relearn the right way. And that was great that you mentioned that. So admit if you don't know, that's fine.
That was all excellent advice. So we're moving on to our last planned question of this evening. And that is, what would you have done differently if you were applying again?
I probably would not have applied to genetic counseling programs, knowing what I know now. But if I had, I probably would not have talked so heavily about diabetes on Guam, because endocrine genetics is still very new. Um, there's not even specific classes for that in genetic counseling. It's mainly diseases and cancers and things like that. So, and I thought it was kind of cool because it's a new and up and coming thing. So I'm showing that I'm interested in it. But no, they were like, well, why aren't you doing like public health then? And it was like, well, because that has nothing to do with genetics. That's just like other things. So I probably would have reined a little of that in because it did kind of show a division to them, where to me, it was not a division of interests, but to them it was. So I wouldn't do that again.
This is a funny question for me, actually, because I applied twice, actually. The first time I applied was, I think, 2016, 2017, and I didn't get in. And then I applied again 2019, and then now I'm here, obviously. But the first, what I did differently, and this is going to be so dumb, but the first time I applied, I only applied to one school. So don't do that. That's dumb. Of course I wasn't going to get in. So the second time I applied to more than one school. I think I mentioned the personal statement stuff earlier, and I won't bring that up again, but yeah, I think so. Between the first time I applied and the second time I applied, I just kind of realized, I thought I was ready to be a graduate student, and I think I just wasn't. I think what I ended up doing was leaving the lab I had been in since I was an undergrad. I went to, like I mentioned earlier, a new lab, kind of switched fields a little bit, learned more topics, and just got more experience, more tools in my toolbox. Yeah, that's probably the biggest thing I did. I think if I were to apply a third time, I would definitely just bring up the stuff that I mentioned for my personal statement, and probably apply to more schools still.
I guess I'll go a little bit on the flip side of the apply to more schools and say don't apply to too many. So I mentioned in the chat, sorry, I applied to 12 schools, and that was definitely too many. It felt overwhelming, and I think once I actually had the offers in hand from the schools that I did get into, I realized some of these schools I didn't really want to go to that much anyway. When I applied to PhD programs, I applied during my senior year, and I didn't really have a backup plan. So I ended up applying to schools that I felt like, maybe weren't the best fit for me, because I was like, well, a grad school is better than no grad school, because I don't know what I'm going to do if I don't go to grad school. And I don't think in retrospect that was a healthy outlook. I mean, I did end up getting into a program that I really like and is a great fit, but I think if I had not gotten into that program and I had ended up going to a program that wasn't as good of a fit, that probably would have been a worse choice than just like taking a couple years off, doing a post-bac, something like that. So I think it's okay to be selective and do have a plan B, which is not to say that like you're not going to get in, but just to say that, if you feel like, I know that if I don't end up going to grad school this year, I have something else that I can do, that takes a lot of the pressure off of the application process. And then you don't feel like you have to apply to 12 programs.
Yeah, I also agree. I applied to probably too many schools. I did like a double dip for certain schools with math and electrical engineering. But yeah, as for like specifics about how I would apply, I definitely would again reach out to professors who I'd like to write me letters of rec, doing that either the semester before you apply, or at the very least doing it at the start of the semester before, like the start of the semester that you're going to be applying during. Because again, it's really good to get good letters of recommendation who can like speak to your ability. But also probably reach out to professors in the graduate schools that I'd want to go to, who are people I'd like to work with. So like, just don't like mass email the whole department, but like if you can find some professors who you really want to work with and they take a liking to you, again, I think it does boost your chances of getting in. So those are two things I definitely would do. Yeah, and probably cut back a little. Take a realistic approach when you're applying to a school. If you get into only that school, would you want to go there? Or would you want to like go to industry, which is, I realize, is not always an option for various majors, but for engineering, you generally have that opportunity. So really take a look and say, if I only got in here, would I want to go here, or would I want to like defer and maybe go into industry and apply next year? Yeah.
Okay, well, since that is it for all of our questions, we can kind of open up the floor. And if anyone had additional questions that were not already answered, feel free to chime in. You can either type them in the chat and like we can read them out loud, or you can also unmute yourself and ask.
There was a question that was dropped earlier in the chat, and I don't think that person's with us any longer, but I did want to make sure it gets on the recording. And I believe that this was addressed to everybody. It was, does anyone know the differences between online grad school and in-person grad school?
So my grad school is online, and it's very much like ASU online. Each class is 7.5 weeks. I'm currently going part-time because I work full-time as well. And yeah, it's very much the same. I've only had 2 classes so far, but it is very closely resembles a ASU type style. There's videos and readings and discussion boards and papers and things like that. I don't know how it's going to go in the future because I do know I have to write a thesis and everything. So it's kind of, like I said, I applied to this on a whim, and my current job has offered to pay for it if I stay with them for a year, but I don't know. So we'll see. But it's definitely different because there's no lab work. Like all of the lab work that I'm getting paid to do it. I'm running qPCRs. I'm at my last job, I was extracting DNA and RNA and testing it in all different ways. So I was kind of getting the lab end of my research at work. I wasn't picking what I was researching though. That depends on your work. But if you can do like what I'm doing, it's hand in hand. If you can do that, that's fantastic. But if you work in like childcare, but you're going to school for something else, I can imagine you would want to do a more in-person so you can have that real life experience. So I think I'm just lucky that it's all working out together, that or I'm just really picky. So I don't know.
Jackie, do they have like an in-person component where you have to go at some point, or is it just all straight online?
Nope, it's all straight online. It is in Whittier, California, so close to Irvine, where I used to work. I could go up there. I get emails all the time that's like student career fair and stuff like that, and it's like, nah, I don't want to. But my classmates are all over the place. So I haven't been told that there's going to be a component like that, but I think a lot of this is more theoretical type work rather than research in the lab type thing. So I think I have a leg up in that area because I'm getting both.
Real quick, could you potentially talk more about jobs that will pay for your grad program and how you find that? Because I know about more like technical jobs, so like cybersecurity and stuff. I know they'll pay for it, but I've never seen it for like bio, and I don't know how you find that.
Well, I'm working with Thermo Fisher, so they're basically the Walmart of the science world, right? Like everybody buys from Thermo Fisher, and Thermo Fisher buys other companies and slaps their name on it, and that's how it is. So there's a really good culture here, and they want to keep people. So if they can help hone your skills by sending you to school, they're going to. There's some, you know, rules. I don't think that they would pay for a PhD, because that is very, as a bio person, you would be in your research lab, you know, doing that work. And I am still kind of thinking about doing that later on when my kids are out of the house. But that my PhD lead scientist, he was like, yeah, that was like 6 hours a day that I was in my research lab. So that I don't think that there's a real way to do that. But you just, if you're applying to places, you can go to the company website, and a lot of the times they have that posted. I know Thermo does. SiO2 didn't. That's a whole nother story. I won't get into that. But there are some places that, like, my sister, she lives in Minnesota, and she works for Mystic Lake Casino, and they paid for her grad school. So they wanted to keep her. So that's, sometimes that can be negotiated. Sometimes it's part of the company policy. You just have to look into the companies that you're applying to.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question, and this goes to everybody. So I'm kind of having to look at graduate programs in 2 states, and this was kind of unexpected. There are schools that have multiple programs that I'm actually interested in. Some are for cancer, some are for molecular biology. I'm kind of interested in both. So my question goes, would you apply to multiple programs at a single university?
Yeah, so I actually did that for both math and electrical engineering at Illinois and Michigan, which they're both good schools for electrical engineering and math. I think you can definitely do it. Some schools I think have restrictions about that, or like special things that are involved. Like, I don't quite remember exactly how it went for when I applied, but there was definitely some stipulations about that. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you can definitely do that if the school allows, but just yeah, again, be careful not to apply to way too many schools, and try not to apply to too little schools, I guess, is my advice.
Where would I find if they do have restrictions? Would that be in a graduate handbook or something?
I think, to be honest, though, the way I found out about it was either A, you can specifically look it up, or B, a lot of the applications when I was going through them, there was like are you applying to another department in our school type section where you would talk about it. So that's either where you will definitely find it there through the application status if there are kind of like special things about that, or you will definitely be able to find it online somewhere.
I don't have any personal experience in this, but I do know, so I have 2 bachelors. One's in human and family development, and the other one is in biological sciences. And I could go 2 huge different directions there. And usually what happens is all of those applications are looked at in only those areas. Only that faculty will look at it. So you're saying molecular bio and cancer, I would look and see if there's any overlap, because my worry would be that there's faculty overlap, and because you're applying to 2, it could be like maybe she's a little wishy-washy on what she wants to do. I don't know if that would actually happen, but that's the first thing that came to mind, because you said 2 very similar things.
Yeah, that's great advice, because I mean, I've only been looking at one type of program, but now I'm unexpectedly having to move, and they don't have the programs I'm interested in. So I'm trying to like figure out my next step. And I think that was solid advice, just checking out like overlap as well.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, I wish I'd mentioned this earlier. One of the biggest kind of points that was brought up when I was applying is I I still currently have a very large interest range where I'd be happy to do thesis work in. And so a lot of the times when I was applying, I A, specifically brought that up in my personal statement, but B, when I was applying and I was talking to advisors, they pretty consistently brought up, yeah, so you have a lot of interests, but that's not what grad school is. Grad school is picking an interest and really focusing in on it. So yeah, like that's probably something I probably could have handled in a better manner. I think I handled it fine though, but yeah, just that is kind of what grad school is about. So coming in with like saying, I have all these interests is not always beneficial. So specifically if it comes up here where faculty see, oh, hey, this person's applying in multiple areas, that may like draw some flags, but just in a larger sense, when you're applying to grad schools and you're talking with people and they're like, hey, what are you interested in? You say everything. And then they go, really? So yeah, just, be careful about that.
So you said cancer and molecular bio?
So I want to do drug and development, drug research and development. And so I would like to get interested. I mean, I would like to be involved in, I'm looking at a cancer chemical biology program, and it's like I fell in love with it. And I'm looking at different programs, different schools as well, but just kind of suddenly have to look in a different state. And so I'm kind of at the drawing board a little bit, and priority deadlines are coming. So I just wanted to know what my options are as I move forward. If there's multiple, like for example, one school does not have anything for cancer. And so if I wanted to go into drug development still, they do have programs that I could get into that would still aid me in
Molecular
that.
bio. Molecular bio is going to talk about cancer no matter what.
Right.
Because that's what it is. There's something is going wrong on a molecular scale that's causing that cancer to grow. What is it? So it is a more broad, where sticking with cancer is like, okay, well, what kind? Genetic or random, So knowing that you want to do drug development, I would stick with molecular bio, because that could be used in lots of different places. Like my PhD boss, he was a molecular biologist, and we were developing blood preservation tubes to be used in cancer screening. So it's not a drug, but it was a liquid biopsy tool. So I think that would be more of a helpful school choice rather than just cancer research or whatever. And of course you can pick something within the school, but I don't know. I'm super partial to molecular bio though, so.
I am aiming for cancer, but I feel like under the umbrella of molecular, I could achieve the same goals. So just trying to, when I see two programs, I'm like, oh, am I allowed to do that? So I just wanted to ask you guys what you thought, and I
overlap,
appreciate it.
and if there is overlap, pick the one that's probably a little bit more broad that you can play around in. But I don't know what the other people might say.
No, I think that's really good. I think that I would be good to find a single program with a single school, and I think I'd be okay with that.
So I guess I can't, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Sarah.
I can't say anything nearly as specific as what Jackie said. So take everything I say here with like a bit of a grain of salt. But the research that I do is in computational linguistics, which means that the faculty that work on it, there's like a 50-50 chance whether they'll be appointed in linguistics or computer science. So when I was looking at applying to programs, I was on the fence of, do I apply to linguistics? Do I apply to computer science? Also thought about applying to both of those departments at the same school, did in a couple cases. And kind of the deciding factor for me of like, do I want to be in a linguistics department? Do I want to be in a computer science department? Was the coursework, because those will be very different course trajectories, and you'll be learning very different things, and your grounding will be very different, and the kind of people that you'll be around will be very different. So, in computer science, we'll be working with people that do like work on very different problems that aren't in your area. As opposed to linguistics, people that aren't in your area are going to be working on also very different things, but different in a different way. And so I think that can be helpful when you're thinking about like two different programs where the research you would do would be the same, but a lot of other parts of your experience wouldn't be.
Yeah, that almost sounds like you were interested in asking linguistic questions using computational methods. And that might be a helpful way to think about it. Like, what questions do you have, and then what tools do you want to use to answer those questions? Well, I was just going to say again, like my field is so far from this, but like one thing that I actually asked during interviews as well was what collaborations are like, both in department and across departments. So like I said, I'm interested in mostly human memory stuff, but I have these questions about human drug addiction, animal addiction models, and those two worlds are quite separate in psychology, despite being under the psychology umbrella. And it just so happened that there are two addiction researchers in my department that were open to collaboration with my advisor that I'm currently working with. I don't know how much happens in other fields, but I think it's just what I would add to this conversation.
No,
Yeah.
that's a very good point.
Yeah, I kind of in that vein. Yeah, if you have interests that kind of lie on a boundary, it's good to see how much like cross-department dialogue there is. Because like some schools, it's like very minimal. Some schools specifically make an effort to try to like bridge two different worlds, which can be very good for research, can be very good for just individual groups that you're joining. So if you kind of have interests in those areas where it like one area bleeds into another, or if they're just like two different fields that are connected in one specific area, it's good to see if those schools allow for that dialogue.
Thank you all so much. I appreciate you helping me kind of face that question.
Also, Melanie, and I'm just saying this because I have some insight since I want to apply to similar programs as you, and it might be helpful for people watching the recording. For biomed, a lot of times schools have an umbrella program where they'll have microbiology, pharmacology, pathology, cancer biology, all in the same, like you apply to one thing. And then by the end of like your first year, that's when you commit to a department. So it might be helpful to look at the schools if there is umbrellas. And if so, like you don't really have to make your choice. It's just dependent on what faculty you want to work with. And if there isn't one, it might be more helpful because biomed is so interdisciplinary, just inherently. Look at faculty that might be working in both departments. So then you know, oh, like for example, like I'm interested in like microbiome and cancer. So I'm looking at faculty there with the microbiology department and cancer department. So I know whatever they're working on, it's going to be a mix of the two.
Yeah, for me, I do know that I want to get into specifically cancer, drug and development, research, drug and development, treatment, prevention. It was just more that now my interests are widened, and some schools don't necessarily, like if you're in a living space and you have to be within so many miles, some schools you kind of have to figure out what umbrella you're gonna be under for what you want. Yeah. So I think that's a lot of grade A advice from everyone.
Cancer is mostly a genetic thing, so you might need to look into genetics, like either heritability or just epigenetics. So it all goes down to the blueprints, baby.
I love genetics, so it's like 100% behind it.
I did have one additional question for letters of rec. So frequently, Jackie, you would know, ASU teachers don't have regular office hours. They have like drop-in or like by appointment office hours. Mm-hmm. So, and I believe in-person schools have a similar thing. So if you guys have experienced that, like what advice would you have for students who want letters of rec, but they aren't comfortable like emailing their teacher to be like, let's go to office hours, but I don't actually have any questions for you type of thing. Like I know the material, quote unquote.
So I think I'm pointing to you because you're above. Nick B here, he said like even if you understand it and don't have any specific questions like, oh yeah, on this problem I didn't quite understand, try to think of, especially if it's like one-on-one, try to think of a question that you could apply to something else. Like, okay, so we learned about this mode of inheritance or this mutation or whatever. how would that same type of thing happen with this? Or how could I apply it to that process? Or, even bringing in real life experience, like, oh, especially if you're biomed, like, okay, so my family member has blank, and I'm talking about genetics in particular. My family member has this. Could you help me try to figure out if I'm at risk for that, or should I look more into that? How would that carry down in the family? Just try to find something to talk about. And usually that's the best bet, is going to be like, oh, well, we learned this today, or this week. How could that relate to something else? I don't know. That's kind of how I figured I got from Nick. Like, you don't have a question, but you can relate it to something else.
Yeah, specifically in a bunch of the classes I'm in, there'll be previous things we've learned in the class. And when you learn something immediately in the lecture or whatnot, it may not entirely cover previous things you've done. So you can maybe pull things you've previously learned and try to relate them to what you're currently learning. That's a really good way of showing you've kind of like, you have a larger understanding of what's going on and like trying to see where things go, which is always good. Yeah, yeah. I think that's all.
I think it's also important. So this is going to be like super personal here, but in my senior year, my husband and I broke up, and I debated about whether or not to tell my teachers, because it was kind of a long time coming thing. It wasn't like, oh my God, he just like walked out on me, and I debated, like, whatever, it is what it is. I'll move forward and just keep doing my work. But I think I talked to some friends, and they were like, do it anyways, because you never know, it might hit you later, or just do it. They might have some advice, or just whatever. So if there's something that has happened in your life that causes you to miss some assignments, or do poorly on a test or something, just be like, hey, I'm not trying to make excuses, but this is what's going on in my life. So I am trying to be present. I am doing my best. And, just heads up. And that can actually lead into some really good conversations. My statistics teacher, she was like, oh, don't get me started. And then we talked about her ex-husband, and like, there was a really good dialogue there that wouldn't have been if I had just kept it to myself. And yeah, just be open.
That's actually kind of funny. I was going to ask, not funny. I'm sorry that happened.
No, that's
That's not funny that happened to you. I'm sorry. That's terrible transition.
No.
That's an awful transition. But I was just unmuted myself because I was going to say, I'm an accessibility student, and I find myself, I'm very neurodivergent, and I struggle very heavily. So I reach out to a lot of my professors, as well as use the accommodations. And I don't like to talk, and I'm very nervous on panels. That's why I haven't talked, and I've been using the chat. So now that it's being recorded, I'm like, ugh. But which is funny, because in our own meetings all the time, I'm always talking. So like no, I'm like but anyway, so I was gonna ask you guys, do you find like transitioning into grad school, like being able to talk with your professors, and like having that like accessibility, like being able to like I'm not able to do that. Being able to do that, basically being able to have that accessibility, being able to like have that leniency when you need it, in that same regard, where if you are having a difficulty in life, or is it so high pressure because it is grad school, because that is something that I am absolutely terrified that's holding you
So
back?
I can speak to this very like recently. My 14-year-old daughter in the middle of September had made 2 attempts on her life. And I immediately, I'm trained in crisis type things, and she's my daughter. So I had like this one mentality of like, okay, we got to do it the right way. And then I had this other mentality of like, I'm going to lock you in a tower that's just like a padded room and you're not going anywhere because I can't trust you anymore. And there was a lot of overlap of those feelings. And it was very difficult to try to focus on answering a discussion board because, I mean, come on, let's be honest, discussion boards are like, I agree that you like pizza, like it's really moronic a lot of the time. And it was in kind of like the middle of my class. So we hadn't really gotten to any heavier material. And I reached out to my professor the first time that I had talked to her. And I was like, listen, this is what's going on. And I don't really have it in me to answer somebody's, like, just make small talk on a discussion board. Like, I don't have it in me this week. Can I get back to it? And she immediately was just like, of course, like life happens. And there's always going to be a little bit of leeway there. But especially if you have, documented things, they're not going to sit there and be like, nope, deal with it. They're
Right.
very understanding. And my current professor, he's a statistics professor, he has the same thing. It's in his syllabus. It says like life happens, things happen. I accept late work in this fashion. And if we talk about it beforehand, then I accept it in this fashion. And I can't speak for PhD programs because it's just a master's program and it is online. But I kind of feel like in high school, we're told, oh, your college professor's not going to put up with any of that. And in college, they're like, whatever, I didn't want to come to class today, so have the day off, And so I kind of feel like it was just that perpetuating type thing where, oh, in grad school, it's going to be like even more to the wire, but I have not experienced that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I'm like, I would love to go to grad school. Terrified, petrified. And it was funny because you mentioned like, oh, like if you work in childcare, like you would want that hands-on. And it's funny because I work in childcare full time and I go online to school full time. And like so I'm like, I would love to go to school. I would absolutely love to go to grad school. So like coming to the panel, I'm like, oh, I would love like hearing you guys talk. I'm like, oh, I would absolutely like motivated. It sounds like I'm having all these questions answered. I'm like, wow, like geared up, fired up, ahead of the rest, ASU. I'm like, hell yeah. Heck yeah. I don't know if I can censor that after the fact. But I'm like sitting here, I'm like, but like same thing where it's like in high school they're like you just said, I'm like, okay, I don't know, but I'm like, I don't know, because it's very, very, very scary thinking about it as like someone who's like sitting there rereading and rereading and rereading. So I'm like quietly listening and I'm like,
I'm not going to ask what your things are, but there's a podcast called Ologies with Ali Ward. And in that podcast, they talk about, she interviews ologists, meteorologists, all of, whatever other ologists, I can't think of anything. Just recently it was vampirology, but there is one episode that is, actually it's a 2-parter. She talks to different scientists who went to grad school with ADHD. And a lot of the people that she interviews will talk about like, yes, I had severe ADHD and I did really bad in high school and I did really bad in college, but now here I am, I have my PhD or I'm working toward my PhD. And it is very, it is like, okay, cool. I'm fairly neurotypical, but I do have my things as well. And it's nice to hear these really successful, knowledgeable people, like, yeah, we all struggle. We all have imposter syndrome. We all have our own things that we have to overcome, but you can do it. And
Yeah.
your peers are going to help you. And you're like, people are more understanding and nice than you would
Well,
think.
when Nicholas was talking about it, Nick, you were talking about imposter syndrome, and being a first generation student. Like, that was super empowering to hear your story talking about that. And like that alone, like, I can't imagine that. I mean, my mom went back to college herself, 50 graduated. That in itself is such a feat, not knowing how to do that. But like, everybody faces that in some sense of it. But like, I was listening to you talk about that, and I'm like sitting here like, oh my god, oh my god. And we were talking about that OH last week. We were like, oh my gosh, I had our OH hour, like imposter syndrome. I don't know if Thal is still on. She brought it up. And we're like, hey. So it's like so fitting and such like a common thing for students that like I'm like, oh my god, what the hell? So I do appreciate everybody. But I feel like someone who is very neurodivergent sitting in a room full of neurotypical people, I'm like, wow, hi. It's like you can sense it almost. So
Yeah.
thanks for putting up with me.
This
I'm
was
gonna mute myself.
amazing. But with 10 minutes left, I just want to make sure that anyone else who wanted to ask questions gets the chance.
Yeah, I took 5 years between undergrad and going to grad school. I was a research assistant in one lab for 2 years, and then I was a research assistant in a second lab for 3 years. So I think it was worth it. I think I wouldn't be as successful in grad school right now if it wasn't for that time. Other people I know don't do that, and I think that's also okay. But I mean, if you just need a break from school, I think it's totally cool. Totally cool.
So, okay, I took a gap year kind of not by choice, because I did apply to grad school and then was not selected, but it was best for me because my first like personal statements and all of those things, it was just speaking from a student's perspective, and working in my field gave me a different layer to add on to my personal statement and statement of purpose, because learning in school is one thing and then doing it is another. It's a whole different layer of knowledge. So I was able to actually talk more technically rather than just like, this is what the textbook said. So I liked it. I think it worked better for me because it also made me really think about what I wanted to do. So without that gap year, I would probably still be trying to get into genetic counseling. So it really helped me shift to where I want to be. It's up to you. If you want to take that time off and just work and get some experience and just relax a little bit, yeah, that's totally fine. Do it. But I will say getting back into school after that has been a little bit difficult because I was used to just school, and then work. And I'd come home from work and just, I wouldn't have anything looming. And now it's like I work and there's things looming. So it is kind of like what is good for you. And but a gap year is totally fine. I think that's great. Find who you are.
Thank you so much.
Okay, and since it's about 9:55 here on the East Coast, we're going to wrap up this event. Thank you everyone for coming out. Thank you so much to our panelists. Next week, we have our weekly OH hour, which is a play on the functional group, alcohol. So we meet up via Zoom, we chat. So if you're interested in being part of Ideas, that is a great way to come out and get to know everyone. We're also looking to host a game night, and we're going to continue the navigating series. So thank you so much all for joining, and panelists, if you are available to stay for an extra 5 to 10 minutes. I think we had one more question regarding fellowships, but I just wanted to close out and put up a link for our website before others leave. So
I just wanted to say thank you to everybody. That was very informative and very much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you everyone who spoke today. Really appreciate it. I wanted Christian to close it out, so we were respectful of your time. But for Sarah, I wondered if you could speak more about I don't know the initials for it, but the Graduate Research Fellowship and the process for applying for that and the fact that you won it, which is really great.
Yeah, so it's NSF. I can put it in the chat here. NSF GRFP is the name of the fellowship, and it's 3 years of funding at the NSF stipend level, which is currently $34,000 and will go up to $37,000 next year. So I'm excited about that.
Whoa.
The research, the application consists of like a research and a personal statement. So that kind of gets back into like what I was talking about a bit earlier with regards to like the difference between the research and the personal statements, because the NSF deadline is also earlier than grad school. So when I was applying to that, that was like my first statements that I had to write. And so that was when I kind of had that crisis of like, well, what's the difference here? And I think it can be really helpful to apply for these fellowships, even if you end up like, you know, going somewhere where the funding isn't that important because the base stipend is good, or it's not something that's like crucial. It can be really good because it forces you very early on. I think the deadline is early November, to think about like, what do I want? Who do I want to be as a researcher? What kind of questions do I want to be asking? All of that kind of stuff. You get to think about it very early on. And then honestly, when I went on to like write the application materials for like the actual grad programs I applied to, I just copied and pasted from my NSF application because that's where all the hard work went in. I don't know, like if you have more specific questions, feel free to ask. There is also Alex Hunter Lang is his name. He posts publicly people's application materials from multiple years, multiple programs. And if you get in, you can submit your materials as well so that they're available to people in the future. So I use that. It's very helpful. My materials are also there if you want to read them.
I actually do have more questions because I'm planning on applying for it. I do know like your chances of getting it, it's like you can apply before you go into grad school and then like your first year of grad school, and then after that it's kind of like that. But there's other fellowships available. So for doing it, you do a research proposal, right? Is that how it works? Yes. Or is it something? Yeah. How do you do that? Like for how you did it, I guess, was it based off of like the previous research you did in your linguistics, so not labs, but I guess like seminars you did, and like how did you, I guess, structure it for like how did you structure it?
Yeah, so I guess like I'll try and go with content first and then structure. So content like was very much based off of my previous work. When I was at that point in the application, I had already done like a couple of like conferences. So I had something to say like, look, my name is here. Like it was on this poster. I did this thing. And I think that was helpful for me to say, you know, I want to investigate these kind of related questions in the future, but I've already done like these steps in this broader picture that I want to explore. So the very high level of my research proposal was there's these different kind of things in linguistics, and people have looked at this one part of it, but they haven't extended that methodology over to these other parts. And so that's how I did the research proposal. With regards to the structure, it's very specific, both for the personal statement and for the research statement. So it's intellectual merit and broader impacts. And you basically just want to read other people's statements to kind of get a feel of how they formatted it. I think that's the most helpful thing you can do. But so for the personal statement, intellectual merit will be kind of the standard personal statement stuff of like the narrative, like here's how I got to like where I am right now and why I'm applying to grad school. And then broader impacts is where you'll talk kind of more broadly about things that aren't necessarily related to your research. So for me, like I mentioned, I kind of took this experience that I had of being discriminated against early on in college and flipped it over and said, you know, I'm going to make CS more welcoming for people. I'm going to make it not be terrible. And that's where I put it, was in the broader impacts of my personal statement for NSF. And then for your research, it's kind of analogous in that, you know, you'll say, here's the problem that I want to solve in the intellectual merit part. And then in the broader impacts, you can talk about, here's how this would impact like other things. So because I do computational linguistics, like the applications are things like machine translation, so Google Translate and stuff like that. And so having a concrete thing of here's how this work that I want to do over the next 5 years is going to like actually improve people's lives, is that's the broader impacts, I guess. Yeah. Does that address your question?
Yep, it does. Thank you.
Yeah.
Nicholas, did you have anything that you wanted to add? Because I know you also, that's how I found your name, was on the Alex Lang website. So
yeah, I don't have much to add. That was very well said from Sarah. Thanks for letting me know about the increase in the stipend next year. I actually didn't know about that. Yeah, the very similar personal statement. I did actually, in this personal statement, bring up all the issues from my undergrad that I've spoken about already. And then intellectual merit of the personal statement kind of talked about the research I had done at my previous lab, as well as some of the work I had started to do. I applied my second year in graduate school. I was going to apply my first year, but then I got COVID and it was just, I couldn't anymore. So I ended up pushing it back to just last year. And then my broader impacts of my personal statement, that is where I kind of looped it back, like Sarah was saying, to like the sort of adversity that I'd faced and like how I'm going to like help people who are going through these struggles of like, yeah, first generation college students, people who feel like imposter syndrome, things like that. I actually wrote about doing things like this, so it's kind of funny that I was invited to this. But yeah, and then my research statement was based off of work I had been already doing in my graduate program, so it's a little different. I think I had also presented at some conferences, I can't remember anymore. But yeah, I talked about that work and where I wanted to bring it. And then, yeah, as Sarah had already mentioned, just sort of the broader impacts of my research. Yeah, what problems is my research going to be solving sort of at large? Yeah. And yeah, I think you can, yeah, I think it was brought up that you can apply twice if you're not in graduate school. I would definitely do that.
yeah, that is true.
And just for clarification, the fellowship, is it available to both master's and PhD students or just PhD?
Okay.
Or do you know?
Sorry, Nicholas, if you know, go ahead.
I think the funding is for a PhD program. Because like one girl in my lab, actually, she's doing a master's right now and she's applying for it.
Okay.
Yeah. Because yeah, it's 3 years of funding. And you can also like divvy up those 3 years however you want. Like I said, I applied for my second year of grad school, so I only theoretically have 3 years left of grad school, so it'll cover my last 3 years. And also I don't have to TA, which is pretty cool.
And I did have one more question. If you guys have time, if not, yeah, feel free to stop me. Just for something that was asked during one of our question, what's it called? Forms that we had. Someone asked about like research experience and how much research experience like you guys had before, I guess, you felt confident going to grad school, or like what's the average amount?
I mean, I'm still in my first semester. I would not say I feel confident about my research experience. I did go to an R1 undergrad, so I think that helped a lot. I had a lot of access to research, but I think really like what Jackie was getting at earlier with like be teachable, that's the most important thing, because you have people coming in, like especially in my department, I'm the only person who came straight out of undergrad. Everyone else was like in the workforce or like did something else and then came. And so we're all at different places in our lives. Some of us have seen linguistics before, some of us haven't. It's really like about coming and being ready to learn and less about like having all of the experience and like the points on your CV, I think. Not that like, I'm sure that did help me and I don't want to like belittle that, but I think, you know, I feel like I'm on an even playing field with people in my cohort that came from very different backgrounds than me.
I'm going to say that it really depends on your field too. So like I did some undergrad research with Dr. Holacek and her grad students, and that was only, I think, one session. No, it was a C session, so it was like the full semester there, and I thought that the way that we did it online was we would read papers. So the grad student that I was assigned to had one hypothesis, and all of the papers said the complete opposite, like the complete opposite. And I think it was very beneficial because we would have those conversations of, okay, this is your hypothesis, but this is what the research is saying. And it kind of forced me to read that research where I wouldn't have before. So I really liked it in that sense. But as in it got me into grad school, no, it really didn't. But that's just me. That is 100% me. So don't take my word for anything.
Yeah, I think I've talked about this earlier. I had a good internship for a few summers where I was able to kind of work on research-based stuff. But technically speaking, that didn't really start out as a research internship. They kind of just threw me at a project and it kind of evolved that way. So in some respect, it's how well you can sell your experiences. But having research is, you know, always good. I can't speak to how much the average student has or the average PhD or grad student, how much they had before coming in, but you know.
I noticed that one program I was applying to underlines that it makes you more competitive to have research experience. So it may have to do with the program.
That's probably very true. If you're going into, you know, you want to go to a grad school that is very research heavy and you have no experience, then yeah, that's probably really true.
Okay. Well, thank you for this informative event. I thank all the panelists for coming out and answering questions, and I feel like this was great. So thank you so much.